We actually gave a webinar a few weeks ago, which I think is really a good setup for this discussion, is how do we get to net zero? Because one of the things that we talked about in the webinar was what are the challenges that the renewable energy industry is facing? I'd like to be optimistic and say, hey, we can get there. We can get to a net zero planet. So I think that the questions that I'm going to be posing to the panel are, how do we do that? And first, let's talk about some of the challenges. So some numbers that I have off the top of my head, the period from 2015 to 2020 in the United States, wind installed capacity doubled in that period. Solar installed capacity went up by a factor of 4. Battery energy storage went up by a factor of 8. So these businesses have been incredibly successful. We need to keep doing that. We need to double that probably 3 more times. If we can double it 3 more times, just like we've done in the past 5 years, that's what we need to do. And then maybe I can start sharing a perspective on maybe start with the scalability piece.
So definitely there is a need to drive more efficiencies in how we work as humans. But something that I really like about renewables is that we have a lot of equipment that's identical. And so that's where we've seen you can apply these models at a whole wind farm level to find insights. So then how do you scale that? How do you build it so that's automatic enough that you can enable your people to be, in effect, really superhuman in what they're doing right now?
Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yep. First of all, I'd like to expand a little bit upon what you just said, how the industry came such a long way. Like I said earlier, I started my career in 2004, and around 2005, I remember these several meetings I had in that year. One meeting with SCE, and back then, there was no such term as energy storage. People just conceptually understood, okay, it's battery, charge or discharge, so what is the big deal about it, right? SCE didn't have any plan in their procurement how to install battery storage, either standalone renewable storage plus. Nowadays, it's kind of common concept, but back then, people had absolutely no idea. So ground zero. I had those multiple meetings, tried to educate why they need batteries in large scale, and people called us crazy. We went to manufacturers, LG Chem and Panasonic, and Samsung even didn't have a battery division back then. And we went to those manufacturers simply to request to provide us the 18650 cylindrical battery cell so that we can build it into larger format and then build it into CNI and the small scale utility market targeted applications. And one of the engineers in the company asked me, so how many cells are you planning to connect in series? And then we told him 20. And he immediately jumped off and then saying, that's crazy. This sounds really, really dangerous. Fast forwarding today, we are connecting more than 300 cells in series, more than thousands of cells in parallel. So this is how much we came on the technology side. In terms of applications, in terms of how to optimize for the best usage of the battery system, to maximize the return on the investment, and also to maximize the life cycle. Those are somewhat untouched area, which is why AI becomes so relevant. Yeah, so again, glad to be here.
Thank you very much for that background. Carla, can you share your perspective on these topics?
Sure. So for BP, with our growth ambition to develop further into the renewable space, BP Wind, we currently have around 9 assets that we are managing, which is doable, right? But as we start to grow more aggressively, how do we kind of scale up, like you were talking about, but still maintain kind of our current business practices and our operational excellence? So we're really exploring right now the various uses of AI and how we can create efficiencies, not only in our operations and in the field, but also in our remote operations center, so that my operator can do, operate more assets and do more in a shorter amount of time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Jay, and actually I think both Jay and Carla use the term optimization, actually. So I'd like to just talk about that. I mean, I think as a lot of us knew before we came here, and certainly I think what we learned today is that AI is not one thing. There's lots of different things here. We've seen here examples of the natural language processing, capabilities, the video analysis. It's so many things. I think one of the classic use cases, though, for AI, is optimization, and there's so many different ways that things can be optimized. Jay's talking about, the design element. I think I want to come back to that. I would like to ask maybe Annette and Carla first. I'll just sort of give a comment. There's a lot of great things about renewables. One of the really great things about it from an economic perspective is your fuel is free. So anything you can do to increase your performance just goes right to the bottom line. Let's make up some numbers here. Let's say that a wind project or a solar project that 90% of the revenue goes back to pay back the debt and to pay the expenses. So you've got a 10% profit margin. If you can increase that energy production by 1 or 2%, let's call it 2%, you've increased your profitability by 20%. So it's huge gains there. So when you talk maybe about how BP's been able to leverage technology to increase the performance, the production of its assets.
Sure. So one of the things that we're looking at is how do we get turbines back online as fast as possible? And so right now we have analytics that we've built to do that. We have our SCADA systems, and we're looking at how can we integrate these tools in a way that makes the human's job easier. So I heard a lot of similar themes in the last presentation around, again, we're not trying to replace necessarily what an engineer does, but how can that analytic engine do that initial pass and then give information on what it's seeing to help make choices faster? And then where can we automate that? How can we get automatically turn turbines back online, for instance?
Right. And trying to also sort of kind of creating these unified SCADA systems, but also as we start to develop and grow more is what kind of artificial intelligence can we use? You have all these contracts, you have interconnection agreements, you have your PPAs. It takes a long time for a human to kind of go through and read through all the contracts and know all the ins and outs, especially if it's common facilities and it shares. So using artificial intelligence to really kind of read through those and identify exactly what are the obligations and what do you have to do is another one, I think, a key point that will help us pivot to be able to take on additional work. And then also in the operations standpoint is using some of our performance and optimization tools that will say, like we have a performance engineering team that looks at all this data. We talked about it this morning in the keynote. You have all this data, right? But what do we do with this data? And it's almost so much data it's overwhelming, but using that data to look at it in a real-time basis to show us, okay, it's showing kind of predictive failures here, or maybe the operators can sort of identify where failures will occur quicker before, I would say, the experts kind of come in and Monday morning quarterback. So to partner with the other organizations and create efficiencies that way as well.
Can I share one more example?
Yeah.
So one thing I like to look back on is how the technology in operations and maintenance has changed just since I came in the industry back in 2014. We used to have humans standing with cameras for a stopped turbine, as you know, to take pictures of blades and understand blade degradation over time. So in just 7 short years, that is being done by robotic drones now. And that data is being fed automatically into large databases. There's some automated analysis going on before it comes to the human. And that has driven a lot of efficiencies in how the engineering team works. And I think it's still yet to unlock a lot of predictive technologies for blades, which is a big challenge right now for the industry.
Thank you for that. That's really an excellent comment. Jay, maybe to you now, you talked about optimization in terms of the design of battery energy storage systems. Is there a role for artificial intelligence in the optimization of design, you think?
Definitely, in many different levels and on many different devices and for many different users. First of all, the first question that we often ask ourselves and ask our customer is, when it comes to optimizations, what are you trying to optimize? Okay. When we talk to IPPs who own a certain megawatt of asset, whether it's PV or PV plus storage systems, their sole goal is so focused on how to maximize the revenue, right? But what they oftentimes missing is what are they sacrificing? I mean, what's the real cost of opportunity, right? Battery system, conceptually, we all understand how battery works, right? just to make sure we're on the same page, let's make a quick example here. Laptop. You hold a laptop and then you use it unplugged, and we have this concern how long this battery is going to last, and we all have a pretty good idea. Well, we all know that the number that is shown or displayed on the computer screen that shows 96%, and you have 4 hours and 30 minutes. We know very well that that is not going to cut out. It's not true, right? So we all have this, somewhat intelligence on in the individual level. We know, okay, it's actually 2.5 hours if I use this way. So we have this kind of embedded energy management system embedded in our brain. Now the challenge is how we can put this in the AI form so that the machines can make those judgment calls on their own. This is the tricky part. There are many moving parts that will affect the actual effectiveness of this energy management system. In short, we call it EMS. Okay, how long are you going to use those batteries, and what's the frequency and what's the magnitude? How long you're going to put it on charge and discharge? All these different factors affects how long the battery is going to actually last over time, right? So in terminology, we call it degradations. So depending on whom we talk to, we often ask them, what are you trying to optimize? Is it solely financial or financial plus technical? And from there, we come up with multiple scenarios where the battery system can last as much as 20 years, 15 years, 13 years, or even 10 years, okay? And so 10-year battery system does not necessarily mean that it's a bad battery. It's a good battery as long as it's successful to achieve a set goal, right? So the set goal has to be very much clearly clarified from day zero. Otherwise, it's not it will be a disappointment for everybody.
So if it lasts 10 years when you expected it to last 10 years, that's great. If it lasted 10 years when you expected it to last 20, not so much actually. So using that AI to give customers that really good insight into how long that battery is actually going to last, depending on how.
Given many moving parts, yes.
Thank you very much for that. Carla, maybe a question for you that I know this falls into your area in terms of energy trading and forecasting. And I think Carla could give us all a lesson in terms of, we're in the ERCOT, Electric Reliability Council of Texas. I mean, it's a market design. Texas, I'm pleased to say, is one of the leaders in the United States in terms of the percentage of energy that's created by renewables. It makes renewable energy operators like Carla, who have a lot of assets in Texas, difficult because they need to be bidding. There's a day-ahead bidding. There's a real-time bidding. Maybe you can talk about how AI has changed that process. Where it was, where it is now, and maybe kind of where you see that going.
Okay. It's I guess funny that I'm now in renewables. When I was in trading, I hated wind because they would always screw up like all of my trades because, you thought you were going to be able to make money, and then all of a sudden the wind picks up at midnight through 3 a.m. and it kills your price, and now you've lost money. But here we are today, and that's still sort of a challenge that we have is that wind, at least specifically wind, right, uses they produce heavily during the evening hours where it's windier. And then, but during the daytime, they still produce, but it's not as great as evening hours. And humans, us, we're sleeping. Most of us, we should be sleeping during the nighttime hours when wind's producing. So there's not a lot of load to absorb that. So over time, as you've kind of mentioned, the power prices lowering, energy prices lowering, well, because of wind and the PTCs, then the market price is also degraded into where it makes getting any kind of financial margins out of it when you're a merchant facility very challenging. So one of the challenges we have now is how can we optimize our asset best and play in not only the day ahead market but also in the real time markets to capitalize on the day ahead real time market spread, but then also consider being qualified to provide regulation services, which means you can, for wind, it's hard. You can't just come up when there's a surge. If someone flips on their light switch, because if there's no wind, you can't. That's where you kind of need the battery and the partnering with other solutions. But we can come down. So if it's okay, now cloud cover comes over, temperatures drop, AC load drops, then you wind could be paid for those sort of services. So trying to figure out, I think, an optimization tool. I think for the industry, just even the energy industry as a whole, but really something specific that's tailored towards renewables and specifically wind is the future and kind of where BP is headed and committed to investing in.
Thank you very much. Maybe a question for our two operators here, and then maybe for Jay. So what I've seen in the industry is that the industry has become increasingly complex. And what I mean by that is a couple of things. So again, when I first started in the industry, you operated winds. If you operated wind, you certainly didn't operate any solar. If you operated solar, you didn't operate any winds. Now what we're seeing is companies they're operating multiple assets. So they're operating wind, they're operating solar, and they're operating battery energy storage as well too. So the business has gotten a lot more complicated. Any thoughts on terms of how AI has really helped deal with that complexity, or maybe how it can help deal with that complexity in the future? Maybe starting with you, Annette.
So I think there's tons of opportunity, and it definitely comes back to the challenge that Carla was just describing with the markets and meeting real-time demand to the energy providers. But I do think there is confidence in the power space, though, because if you look at your utilities, they've operated different kinds of assets for a long time. They've had fossil plants, nuclear plants, and they've gotten into the solar and wind space as well. So I think as an integrated energy company, that's where BP sees a lot of opportunity as well, because we see so many learnings that you can bring across the mature oil and gas industry into renewables. So renewables can operate at this really fast pace. And like I described, some of the technology advancements happening very rapidly over the last handful of years. There's still a lot of room to grow in terms of maturity of the industry and processes from the oil and gas side. So I think, again, that's something where we try to partner on the technology side with the oil and gas side of BP to say, hey, what have you done there? How can we apply it here? Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of the same technical challenges.
Thank you very much. Carla or Jay, you want to take a crack at that one?
Yeah, quick comment on the general, the characteristics when it comes to PV generation versus wind generation. In general, I think, especially in ERCOT, they complement very well. During daytime, large amount of sun that can generate electricity. During the dawn and going over to the nighttime, wind picks up, right? It generates power. There's a term called duck curve. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the term. Basically, the duck curve explains about the big belly of the duck, where the power generation, the load, the amount of load for a certain hub goes way below during the peak generation during the daytime, and then suddenly it picks up after 4 p.m. And this curve goes up exponentially until 8 p.m. or 10 p.m. until people usually go to bed. Okay. Now the duck curve is becoming a large issue. Is if PV, especially PV generation, is not coupled with battery storage, because this quick ramp up, it means the voltage swell and the deviation on the frequency side on the grid. It causes a lot of problem. It's intermittencies, right? So again, the battery storage can resolve this duck curve issue. And then when at the nighttime, when the wind blows and they generate power, it can store those energies, right? So technology-wise, oftentimes, people usually tend to focus on the importance of the lithium-ion battery, but in long term, if we are more focusing on the grid resiliency, it requires all type of battery technology, not just lithium-ion, but the flow batteries or sodium nickel chloride or sodium sulfur, all kinds of different form of energy storage and the battery storage technologies to really increase the big muscle to support our fragile the grid infrastructure.
Yeah.
Just to comment on that, because again, I've worked in renewables for 18 years now, historically in wind, and historically, the name of the game was just make as much energy as you could. And so I've always just thought about production. I've never thought about distribution. The idea, and if you think about it, and pardon me if you guys have already thought about this, but it really kind of blew my mind. The grid operators have to almost perfectly balance supply and demand. I mean, almost perfectly. And you think about how well they do that and how reliable it is. And until recently, there was no such thing as storage. So, they're constantly orchestrating. They're bringing things on, they're taking things off. It's really a remarkable feat that they're able to do that. Maybe a question, maybe starting with you, Annette. Again, having worked in the industry for a long time, I think wind, especially in the United States, has a very good safety record. It's not perfect. People do get hurt. Occasionally there are fatalities. I know that having personal experience in working with BP as a customer, that safety is just a huge value. It's a core value of BP. Any thoughts on how artificial intelligence is helping improve safety in renewables specifically?
There's a lot of work on the digital side, but I do think there's more room to look at the AI side of it. So I think we saw a fantastic example this morning with the risk matrix and learning how can we expand the capability beyond those in the room when you're doing those risk reviews. I think a big focus for us this year is dropped objects. That is one of the big hazards in working in wind, working 300 feet in the air. And so when I saw some of the work around the optics, one of my first thoughts was, well, how can this help us around tethering and parts and making sure that we are protecting people when they're working up high in the air?
Great. Maybe Carla, and then we'll come back to you, Jay, in terms of battery energy piece.
Yeah, so I think also, this is related to safety, but fatigue management. So having wearables where that tracks sort of the hydration and the sleep of a technician, and trying to even do that for our real-time operators that are there dispatching in the air conditioning. But that way you're able to track sort of even who you should dispatch out if you need to go and fix something, where you kind of can look at, use the AI to say, okay, and all the data, this technician didn't really get great sleep and he didn't drink his water and it's 110 degrees outside. Maybe we won't dispatch him out. But then also even in using sort of semi-AI in stopping work and increasing production, like when there's lightning, right? So some of our wind farms, they span across many, many miles. And so right now, like if we spot lightning, it's kind of like everyone shuts down, you go home, you lose production. But we're working on kind of trying to refine that where, okay, maybe because it's 75 miles wide at one of our wind farms. So someone who's on the very, very west, they may say lightning 10 miles away, but someone who's on the east working on the site, maybe they don't need to necessarily shut down. And like our old way for safety would have been like, nope, everyone's safe. So kind of using kind of AI tools to sort of look at lightning, where it strikes, using the wearables to locate your GPS location to improve safety.
Thank you. Jay, from your industry?
So when it comes to safety of the battery system especially, it really starts with how effective and efficient program you have when it comes to predictive maintenance and corrective maintenance and the overall O&M schedule. And on the contractual side, it is also very important to have the effective terms and conditions stated in the LTSA agreement, right? Everything has to work out perfectly. Otherwise, there is always some loophole and gaps and overlaps, which will increase the cost for the customer and also with less effectiveness, which is bad for the system in terms of the overall reliability, right? So I'd like to touch base on predictive maintenance, since it has a direct impact on the safety of the system. First of all, I think that there's many myths around the safety of the lithium-ion battery. It's a lot safer than what you may think. Some people have some concerns carrying cell phone batteries, and what if it get crushed and catch on fire? There are multiple safety nets that prevents that. And when it comes to EV, the batteries, there are multiple, even more higher number of redundancy and safety nets, and that is really, really safe. But there are some bad apples. Okay, cheap batteries comes with very bare minimum BMS, bare minimum sensors, which gives really the industry the bad name. So the predictive maintenance, oftentimes people try to look for the low cost options. So they may compromise, right? They may compromise on the number of the scheduled events per year. So when the five events is really necessary and optimal, people compromise to maybe 2 or 3 times. And when X number of hours per event is necessary, they may cut down to maybe 70 or 80% of those time, just to simply maximize the revenues, right? So the industry standard needs to be changed. This is where the AI becomes really important. So as you compromise, some compromise is okay. Some compromise has a really good name, value engineering, right? But value engineering is absolutely necessary, but at what cost, right? So this is where the AI becomes really important to visualize the overall impact and quantify those impacts and visualize it and let people, the decision makers on the customer side and vendor side and the system integrator and engineer side, make everyone be aware what are they compromising for? What's the real cost?
That's excellent. I have a question that I suspect that a lot of you in the audience, does that mean 2 minutes? Okay, great. That I suspect that a lot of you in the audience have. And how do you develop an AI strategy? In other words, how much and what kind of things do you want to do internally? And then how much and what kind of things do you want to work with a partner on? So maybe your thoughts on that first.
Sure. So it's always driven by the value. And so that's where, we look at our business. And also when we're doing digital or AI, it needs to underpin and enable whatever your business strategy is. So that's where we look to start. So and then from there, we can leverage different kinds of AI. So, areas where we still see a lot of opportunity would be the robotics space, production optimization as well. And from there, we look at then specific projects and look at use cases.
Yeah. What gets me excited is the EMS side, really. When it comes to the battery technology, new type of technology, new battery cell, people oftentimes talk about the importance of the solid state batteries. It's the next big thing that is coming. So there are many things going on, but personally, I'm very much focused on the optimization part. I don't think we fully realized how to put the right dollar value on the existing current technologies. So we need to have a good, effective methodology how to quantify those values, such as resiliency. How do you quantify that, right? So I think this is a part where, with a good, effective EMS solutions, we can quantify that.
Thank you. I'm afraid that we've run out of time, but I think our panelists would be available to answer your questions. Could we please join me in giving a hand to our panelists? Thank you very much.